welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new around here, then my name is Katie. I'm a full-time mixed media sketchbook artist, and today I'm going to be filming a little bit of a different video. This is something I've not done before, but I'm filming a week in my sketchbook. So I'm going to show you how I fit art into my life around the things that I do. I'm going to do a bit of drawing outside, hopefully, and I might not fill it every single day. I might do a bit one day and finish it the other. So I basically just want to show how flexible art can be. You don't have to create a whole new masterpiece every single day. And so I'm just going to show you my processes. I'll be doing a voiceover to talk you through what I'm doing and the materials I'm using and where I am. And I'm going to be using the Clairefontaine Mixed Media Sketchbook. This is the gold line one. I'll link all of my materials down below, but I'm really excited to share this video with you and I hope you enjoy it. So let's start with day one. So I'm starting by doing a study of these beautiful flowers. I got a bouquet from Mitch, and whenever I get flowers I always really want to paint them, so I thought this would be the perfect subject to start this week of sketchbooking. I'm going to be using my Kuretake Gansai Tambi paints. This is a little bit amended from the original palette, which was the Art Nouveau set. So I'll leave a link up in the cards and down below where you can see how I customized this and just change up some of the pans in there to alter the shades so that it was my perfect colour palette. I am also, of course, having a cup of tea. This is something I never usually show in my videos, but it's a must, and also some biscuits too, which I'm definitely a dunker, so I've got my sustenance ready for painting. And with watercolours, I'm still quite new with it, but I've really enjoyed using these mop brushes, so this is by Artway. As I said in the intro, I will leave a link to all of the materials that I use down below, but if you have specific questions about colour shades and specific materials that I might not have popped down there in the description, then just let me know in the comments. So the mop brushes hold a lot of water, which is why I prefer using them for my watercolours. It's still a medium that's quite new to me, but I'm really enjoying using it and trying to find a looser style. A lot of the times when I use watercolours or when I see people use watercolours, it's a little bit more traditional, and so I've really enjoyed trying to find how I would use it in my usual work and also not be too tight. So one of the ways I do that is to not sketch first. So I haven't sketched on these, so you'll see in some later sketchbook pages that I have sketched a few things. But for these I really wanted it to be loose and organic, and I'm just trying to use the shape of the brush to create the petals. So that really helps me to stay loose, and you can get really fine points on these brushes. So the mop brushes, also with the round brushes, it's why I love using those as well, because you can really rely on the shape of the bristles to create marks, and it just helps me to be a little bit looser, and I just really enjoy using this technique. So as I'm drawing this, I thought I would just talk a little bit about how I'm going to be using the sketchbook this week. So as I said, I don't fill the whole sketchbook. I don't do like 7 complete things. I finish things a little bit later on, and I just want to really show how, despite being a full-time artist, I don't create every single day, and sometimes I don't have enough time to finish a whole piece in a day. This one I did, however, so I was really happy to fill this spread with these lovely flowers before they died, because I know that they were running out of time, and so I really wanted to get them in my sketchbook. I love having flowers on my desk, it really brightens up my studio, but obviously they don't last forever, and putting them in my sketchbooks means that I can enjoy them again and again. So you can see here I'm filling in around some of the gaps with some green, so I'm using quite a few different greens here, and again still trying to just fill in around the shapes. Because I didn't have a sketch, it's not super accurate, but it doesn't have to be. You can still get the sense that this is obviously a bouquet. Here you can see where I'm being really precise with my lines because of the nib or the end of the bristles. But I'm just getting the sense of the flowers, so the positioning isn't perfect because, like I said, I didn't accurately put down the layout, but it works absolutely fine, and I'm really happy with how this piece turned out. One of the things I am learning with watercolours is the having to wait for it to dry. Where I usually use gouache, it dries a bit quicker because I'm using less water. Whereas obviously with watercolour, I am applying quite a lot of water onto my page. And that's another reason why I picked this sketchbook. So as I said, this is the Clairefontaine Gold Line Mixed Media Sketchbook. And when I'm using watercolour, especially in this watery way, when I'm using my mop brushes specifically, I prefer to use it in this mixed media sketchbook. I find it holds the water really well, and I can be a little bit more playful than I can in some of my other sketchbooks that don't handle it quite as well. So generally I'll either be using this one with my watercolours or my Strathmore. So I had to let that dry. Overall, I'd say this took maybe half an hour, but that doesn't include drying time. Generally, I do work quite fast and I'm quite an impatient artist, so I won't ever spend more than, say, an hour in my sketchbook unless it's really intentional that I'm spending a bit of a long time, or if I'm doing a larger piece. But for this one, like I said, I did have to wait for it to dry, and I think that's the hardest part of using watercolour for me, is having to come back. Because usually I try and get things done in one go, or try and get a stage done in one go. So I'm using my Faber-Castell Polychromos. I have a really big range selection. Obviously you can see the box in the background. So it worked really well here, and I could just add on top of my watercolour layers really beautifully, and they're a little bit harder, so I find they keep the crisper lines better. So I'm just adding on top with a few more details, but otherwise this one is done. So I'm really happy with how this one turned out. I really love the colours, it feels very fresh. I really tried to keep the yellow from getting muddy, and I'm really happy with the joyfulness that comes through on this spread. So that was day 1, and now we're moving on to day 2. So again, in the Goldline sketchbook, I'm going to keep everything in this sketchbook just so I can flip through at the end and show you everything. Now for this one I am using a pencil to mark down my sketches. Now I don't often do this, but when I'm doing my spreads that are different elements from different things, then I do like to. So I often do it with my travel sketchbooking just to try and make sure everything fits on the page, and I do think a bit more about my layout when I'm doing this style of spread. So this one's going to be more like a visual diary. The previous weekend I'd gone to Winchester with some of my family, and so we took some photos, and I wanted to do a spread documenting that day. I didn't take my sketchbook with me because I was with them. When I'm on my own or when I'm just with my husband, I will often take my sketchbook just because I know that he can have his book and he's very patient with me, whereas I don't often want to hold other people up unless I've pre-warned them that I want to do some art. But it was really nice on this day that the weather was okay, so we went for breakfast and then we went for a really long walk in Winchester up St Catherine's Hill. And here I'm using gouache, so I didn't use watercolour this day. I think this is the only day that I didn't. But you can see I'm still using it a little bit wetter, and I'm really trying to use my brush again to create that texture. So this was a stack of Biscoff pancakes, and obviously there was a lot of Biscoff sort of running down the side of the pancake, so I didn't want it flat. I really wanted to show the texture, so again I'm using my brush to create that rather than adding it in after or using mixed media. So using the bristles is a really nice way to create a lot of texture with your gouache, and also applying a bit more or less water. So once I'd done the flowers and the pancakes, I moved on to the green, so I'm adding on the other details. I try and do the cleaner colours first, so sometimes that's the sky, sometimes it's like the lighter colours, so the pinks and the beiges here, and then I'll come in with my green. And that's just to stop my water getting too muddy and making the whole piece feel a little bit dirty, so that's why I work in that way. So for this spread, obviously I am doing the gouache layer first, which I always do. I always start with that and then I'll come in with my pencils once it's dry, which is what I'm doing here. Didn't take as long to dry as the watercolours, so I could get straight on with this. But you'll notice in a minute that I will come in with the other side of the spread, but this was done over 2 days. So for this one I did do the sketches on both sides of the page, but I only filled the left side with the gouache and finished it off with the pencils too. So for the following day I went on top of my sketches that I'd done the first day, but I didn't do the whole spread. It's actually quite a big ask to do the full spread. Here I am, you can see the sketches already down there, but this was the next day. So this was Wednesday of last week because I started the challenge on Monday. And I'm just coming in with my watercolours here, so I'd forgotten the day before that I'd done gouache, so I actually used my watercolours for this spread. But because I have sort of a set colour palette, I think it still works, it still feels like one spread, but I did do it in 2 days. And I think that's really absolutely fine to do as an artist, and you can share it as one or you can split it into 2 posts if you're sharing online. However you work, you can add to it bit by bit. And I think that helps with the pencil sketches first, because you can do the whole pencil sketch and then maybe fill it out throughout the whole week and keep adding it an element by element. So this is a really nice spread if you are short on time and want to fill a sketchbook or fill a spread. Doing it bit by bit is a really more manageable way, especially if you're busy and you've got lots of things to juggle. So I added on my writing with my fountain pen, so that's the Sailor Food de Manin, and I'm really happy with how this one turned out. I really love spreads like that. And now we are on to day 4, so we've done day 1 to 3 and created 2 spreads. But for this one we were actually going away, so it was our first wedding anniversary and I knew I wanted to do some drawing or some painting when we were away. So we were going to the New Forest and back to the place where we got married and doing a little stay there. And here I am packing my art supplies. So as a mixed media artist, I do find it tricky to decide because generally I don't know what I want to use medium-wise until I'm creating. And that's why I like having my studio, because I have all the options around me. But I think it is helpful as a mixed media artist to have some limitations. And as I was doing this challenge already, I kind of knew what I was going to want to gravitate towards. So I took my watercolors and I took my colored pencils. I also took my Neocolors and I'm packing these all into my homemade pencil roll. So I don't have a pattern or anything for this. I have been asked before, but I just kind of bodged it together. And I talked a little bit more about this on my Patreon. But I've got the little pockets down below for my Neocolors. I'm also taking some Tim Holtz Distress crayons, a beige Posca and some Derwent ink tints. So for me, this is quite pared back. It was hard to decide on colours. Generally, I try and think about where I'm going and what colours I'll need. I'm also taking some Derwent water brushes, so I just filled those with water before I left. And I've also got the Faber-Castell Click and Go pot in the background there, which it was really helpful, and you'll have seen that in last week's haul video. So it's got a little ribbon closure, so I just tied it up, and it's quite a nice size to slot in my bag. Generally, I take quite big bags with me anyway. So I've got my pot, my pencil roll and my sketchbook, and then I've also got my Gansai Tambi watercolours again. And here we are at the place where we got married. This is in the New Forest in Brockenhurst, and we checked into the room and we were going out for dinner, so we had about an hour before that, so I decided to paint the view outside. It was a little bit rainy and a bit grey, and so the lighting isn't great in here, it's very yellow. And I also am on the wobbliest table in the world, which I didn't realise while setting up. I tried to tighten it because it's on like one pole on this circular table, but I couldn't. So apologies if there's a bit of wobbliness. I did try and stabilise it a little bit, but I stood up whilst I was painting this and just kind of held the sketchbook, so it wasn't too bad, but it would have been a lot easier for filming if it wasn't so wobbly. But again, I'm using an Artway mop brush. This is the size 2, so it's slightly smaller. I didn't show this when I was packing, but it was a last minute addition. Generally, I always panic before I leave and grab a few more supplies, but this was the only thing I added in. And it worked really well. I really liked having this, but you'll see I do use the Derwent water brushes when I'm actually outside. So obviously I was still in the hotel room here, so I could use my pot of water and just use a paintbrush to rinse it off. And I'm keeping it quite wet and watery again. Like I said, this is a good sketchbook where I can do that. And here's my setup. So I'm just stood up by the window and painting the view outside. So I'm not working from a photo and trying to work on my observational skills, which is always really nice. And I haven't done it outside of the studio before. I'm either drawing outside plein air or I'm in my studio. So I haven't actually done it from on a table elsewhere. But I did try to push myself out my comfort zone, which you'll also see later on this week. So again, I waited for that to dry and then I added on my pencil details, and I'm really happy with how this one turned out. I think it looks really nice. It really reminds me of our first anniversary stay, and I love the memories that go along with this. I didn't use the Neocolors much, but I did just use it to add on a bit more colour here, which you can see, and just define some of the details. So most of the work had been done by the watercolour, but I did want to add on a bit more texture and a little bit more colour with my coloured pencils. So I'm adding on a little label at the bottom, again to make it more diary-like. I really love the personal connection that this adds to my sketchbook, and just finishes it off nicely. So this is the final spread. Here was the view that I could see, obviously a bit grey, but this was my setup with the paints and the pencil roll, which made it really handy to see all the colours that I had. So that was day 4, and I did just want to show how I cleaned up my palette, but I can just wipe that off with a wet piece of paper towel so I could put it in my bag knowing I was going out and about the next day. So here we are on day 5, I think we're on now, and walking to Bewley. Saw these cygnets, swans and ducks, which was really, really sweet, and went for a little walk. So we walked from Bewley to Buckler's Hard, and there was actually an exhibition on here which was part of the Sky Arts Landscape Artist of the Year 2024. So they came here, I think it was the semi-final. These are the paintings that they created, and there were also some other Buckler's Hard paintings from local artists. Then we went for the walk back. We saw a golden winged dragonfly as well, and of course had some ice creams to reward our very long walk. And yeah, it was a really lovely day. It was much brighter this day than it was the day before. So we did quite a lot of walking. After Bewley, we went to Exbury Gardens. So here we are at Exbury Gardens. Obviously it's a little bit cloudy here, and by the end it was gorgeous blue skies, but it was a really lovely spot. I found a bench and got painting. So here I am painting outside. I've got my Kuretake watercolor set again, and I'm using the Derwent push button water brushes. And it was very bright, so apologies that you can't really see the page very well or the colours. It does get a little bit better later on, but it was quite bright, and I didn't quite realise my exposure on my camera was set a little bit too high. But I really enjoy painting outside. I've always said I don't love the way that my art looks compared to the studio, but I'm really happy with this one. I feel like I got a good balance of what I wanted it to be. And I often say that I prefer the feelings of the ones I create outside because I remember it better. And that's definitely the case here. There were so many gorgeous views in these gardens, but I decided to pick this tree, which really stood out to me. And I am getting to use my Derwent Inktense blocks here. So that really encourages me to be a bit tactile. I actually dipped them in the water and applied it straight onto the page and then smudged it with my finger. So I was able to use a little bit more mixed media, which is definitely a love for me. I really enjoy mixing up my supplies, but I come back in and sort of swap things out with the paint and then the pencils as well as the Derwent Inktense blocks. And I'm also going to be using the Tim Holtz Distress crayons a little bit. So I used the brown, the sort of bluey colour and the green, which is just another medium to play with. So you can see here I'm using one on the bottom. So I'm just trying to create scribbles and just build up that texture. They're a lot softer than Neo colours. I did have a few questions, so let me know if you want to know more about them. But it was really helpful to have that colour. They have some really lovely shades, and I'm just sort of adding to this. So I'm still trying to do the base first, and then I'll let it dry and come in with more pencils. But I'm trying to keep it really loose and fresh, so trying not to be super detailed. If I was comparing it to a photo, it's not very accurate. But for me, it still encompasses that day, and I'm just trying to add in a bit more contrast here. So I'm going to put some music on, and I'll come back in a minute when I'm adding on a few more details. Okay, so it had dried by now, so luckily it dried pretty quick as I was working, and I didn't spend too long on this one, but that's because I wanted it to stay loose and not too detailed, so I was trying to work quite fast. I'm adding on some more contrast with my coloured pencils and the few Neo colours that I did actually use, and just trying to finish this off. It was definitely in danger of being overworked, so I had to really force myself to stop because I could have just kept going. But then I just add on the little label as always down the bottom, and I'm really happy with how this turned out. I added on a jade green Neo colour just to add a pop of colour, which I think worked nicely. And here's my setup, here's the view and all of the things on the bench next to me. I find working on the bench really helpful. And here is how that sketchbook spread turned out. So that one was done in one go, and here are just some more views from around Exbury Gardens. So many lovely places. I definitely want to come back to do some more drawing because they have some beautiful little areas all around that I think would be gorgeous to paint. So I think we are on day 6 now. We went to a cafe. So I did my very first sketching at a cafe, which you can see here. I just took this quick clip. I didn't film the process, but you can see my setup here with my pencil wheel on my left. And I just did the outline. So just started with the sketches. This was the very first time I've done sketching in a cafe. It's definitely out of my comfort zone for me. I'm fine creating outside because generally I feel very sort of out of the way, whereas in a cafe I feel like there's lots of people around me and I'm definitely a bit more anxious socially. But I'm really glad I did this. I thought it was helpful to do the sketch first and then I could come back with my paints, and maybe I'll take my paints with me another time when I've built up my confidence a bit more. But I'm really glad I did the sketch there and it was absolutely fine. I definitely want to do it again and do it on my own because I was with Mitch, so that's my next step, and then to do colour there. But I really enjoyed it, and as I said, I did that on the Saturday, so that was day 6, and then day 7 I actually finished it off with the painting. So it worked out really well to split it in that way, and because I've got quite a busy schedule and trying to juggle everything in, splitting it into 2 made it really helpful. So again, with the idea of the spread earlier, of doing element by element to fill your spread, you can also do the sketch first and then the paint another day. So that's what I did with this one, and again I'm just using my Kuretake watercolors to fill it in. Again, trying to keep it nice and loose, so I feel like I was trying to stick with a style for this week. And for this one I'm trying to add on a bit more interest in the colours rather than doing flat colours again. And then I'm adding in my pencil lines. This really brought it to life. I don't often outline my art, but I think it worked really well here and it really added that sort of confidence, which I think was lacking from the original sketch because obviously I did it outside. But adding these on after the watercolour really finished it off nicely. I could tell I was being a bit hesitant and tentative at first, and then by the end of it I was being really bold with my marks, and I'm really happy with how this turned out. I'm really glad I drew it, and again, this isn't a subject that I do often. I'm very much more confident with landscapes and nature, and so drawing food and the drinks that I'm doing here and the one that I did with the pancakes was very out of my comfort zone as well. But I really enjoyed it, so definitely something I want to do again. And having this little challenge really helped me to push out my comfort zone this week and learn a little bit more about where I want to take my art and try new things and continue pushing out my comfort zone. So I'm just adding on the swatches here, and I do also add on some more journaling, so I make it more diary-like with my fountain pen again and just add on a few details. I really love using it in this sort of visual diary way. It's really nice to have that connection with my sketchbook and to be able to look back through this and remember a little bit more. So here are the final shots of this spread, and that was day 7, so that's the end of my challenge, and I'm going to show you a quick flip through of all the pages. Obviously you've seen all the process, but I want to show you how they look together in the sketchbook. So as I said, I'm really happy with this challenge. I'm really glad I took it with me, and I want to do that more. I often create things in my studio here and there, so I might do a sketch one day and then finish it the next day. Or I will take it plein air when I know that I'm going to have time for drawing. But what I want to start doing is maybe carrying my sketchbook with me wherever I go and doing quick pieces here and there rather than being a bit more intentional with my art. I really like the idea of carrying it with me and just doing a quick sketch when I wasn't expecting to, and really trying to fit art in around my off time and bringing back a bit more of the hobby aspect to it despite me being a full-time artist. So I hope you enjoyed this one. A huge thank you for watching. A really big thank you to my patrons for their support who allow me to create these videos here on YouTube for free, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have a creative week ahead, and I will see you next Sunday in my new YouTube video. See you later.